Pancake everyone. Cinema shows us elegant ladies and noble knights, romanticizing the Middle Ages and the atmosphere of that time. However, in reality it was far less fragrant. Until the 19th century, Europe was characterized by appalling conditions. Amidst the nighttime silence and daytime hustle, the scent of unsanitary places, night pots serving as toilets, filled the air. In England and Scotland, residents would throw the contents of their chamber pots directly out of the windows, shouting "Gardez-le" to warn passers-by. In late 13th century Paris, a law was also enacted that required people to shout "Watch out, water" when emptying their chamber pots out of the window. By the way, this is why the fashion of wide-brimmed hats emerged during that period. The accessory protected expensive clothes and wigs from whatever might fall from above. Throughout Europe, street cleaners were hired to clear the streets of excrements and maintain passability. In the Middle Ages, toilets were practically non-existent except for among the upper nobility. However, even the toilet rooms in wealthy homes had nothing in common with modern bathrooms. They were usually just separate rooms where European ladies and gentlemen relieved themselves directly on the floor, and servants cleaned up after them. Needless to say, despite the servants' efforts, the foul smell from such procedures lingered. According to descriptions by many visitors to Paris, including Leonardo da Vinci, the streets of the city were filled with a terrible stench. And the most odorous place in the city was Versailles. The reason being that once people entered the palace, they tried not to leave until they met the king. Since there were no toilets there, little Venice did not smell like roses. Louis XIV himself had a water closet, and he could even entertain guests while sitting on it. Being present during the toilet of high-ranking individuals was considered a great honor. It is said that when the stench in the castle became unbearable, King Louis and his entourage would move to another residence, and only then would the rooms be thoroughly aired and cleaned. Human waste was everywhere, at the doors, on balconies and courtyards, on the windows. Given the quality of medieval food and poor sanitation, diarrhea was common. You simply couldn't make it to a toilet in time. The first public toilet in Paris appeared only in the 19th century, but it was exclusively for men. In Russia, public toilets appeared during the time of Peter the Great, but they were also initially meant only for courtiers. However, unlike France, toilets here were designed for both men and women. And 100 years ago, Spain began its electrification campaign, aptly named UNIVAC, which stands for water closet in Spanish. In reality, the first flushing water closet appeared much earlier. It was invented by John Harrington, a courtier of the English royal court in the late 16th century. However, it did not gain popularity due to its costliness and lack of proper sewage systems. In the Middle Ages, bad teeth were seen as a sign of noble origin. Now I'll explain why. Many believed that in medieval times bad teeth were common among peasants and lower classes. However, in reality, dental problems were more prevalent among the aristocracy. This was due to the widespread consumption of sugar in Europe between the 11th and 15th centuries. Sugar was atypical in people's diets at that time, and as a result, those who could afford it experienced a surge in tooth decay and other dental issues. Consequently, bad teeth soon became an indicator of wealth and noble descent. Moreover, the owners of such teeth were not too eager to seek medical help, which is understandable since anesthesia did not exist back then, and any dental problem was resolved radically through tooth extraction. In the Dark Ages, lice were referred to as God's pearls and considered a sign of holiness. Both male and female saints often boasted that water had never touched their feet except when they had to wade through rivers. Additionally, enamored troubadours would remove fleas from themselves and place them on the lady's heart to symbolize the mingling of their blood in the insect's stomach, uniting the hearts of the sweet couple. While this might seem rather repulsive today, back then it was considered romantic. Despite their holiness, insects still plagued people. That's why everyone carried a flea trap or a small dog. The latter was commonly used by women. So, dear ladies, if you ever see someone with a pocket dog and a pink bonnet, remember the origin of this tradition. There was another method of getting rid of lice which was popular among women with luxurious hair. They would take a piece of fur, soak it in blood and honey, and then place it in their hair. The scent of blood would attract the insects, causing them to get stuck in the honey. People also wore silk undergarments, which by the way became popular precisely because of their smoothness. God's pearls couldn't cling to such a slippery fabric. But all of this pales in comparison to the use of mercury, which people would rub on their scalp or even consume in the hope of getting rid of lice. Unfortunately, people died from this practice, not the lice. In the Middle Ages, soap was primarily used for medicinal purposes and personal hygiene. Soap was often made from lye and fat. Sometimes wood ash mixed with lard or oil was also used. The soap was then shaped into cakes and bars, with the addition of dried flowers and fragrances like lavender. The quality and scent of soap depended on the individual's wealth. However, soap making was not always limited to lye. Unfortunately, some people made soap using harsh alkali, which would cause severe skin abrasions. Soap making became more common in the 16th century, when trade routes opened and the raw materials needed for soap production became more accessible. However, it wasn't until the 18th century that soap making became an important industry in Europe and was widely used for personal hygiene and cleaning. Almost any water-related procedures were considered not only unnecessary but also classified as barbaric in the past. Most medieval doctors advocated the regular use of baths, except during periods of the plague, as they believed that the expanded pores after contact with warm water could absorb contaminated air. However, in reality, few people listened to the specialists' recommendations. Interestingly, the privilege of not bathing belonged to the wealthy layers of society. For instance, Queen Isabella I of Castile personally admitted that she only bathed twice in her entire life, at birth and on her wedding day. The daughter of one of the French kings died from lice infestation. Pope Clement V died from dysentery, and Pope Clement VII painfully passed away from scabies. There was also the Duke of Norfolk, who refused to bathe due to religious beliefs. Eventually, his body was covered with abscesses, and his servants, seemingly more resourceful than their master, waited for him to drink himself to death, then put him in the bath, and somehow managed to wash him. In the bedroom of Louis XIV, who also only bathed twice in his life, the smell of filth was so strong that Russian envoys later wrote, "The French king smells like a wild beast." By the way, it's noteworthy that Russians were considered real barbarians in comparison. By the standards of that time, they bathed disgracefully often. Many Europeans described with horror the bacchanalia that took place during bathing procedures in Russia and commented on how uncultured and dark-minded the Russian people were. Such an attitude towards water procedures was influenced by many factors. Some feared infection, others believed in myths that washing the face leads to blindness and other health issues, thirds simply feared water because they weren't accustomed to it since childhood. Additionally, some refused bathing for religious reasons. The whole problem was exacerbated by the fact that laundry was not a regular activity in the Middle Ages. Dirty clothes were washed no more than twice a year, and a mixture of alkali and urine was used as a detergent. To combat the terrible smell, various aromatic substances were used. Ladies used powder, men preferred putting small bags with dried herbs between their clothes, and underarms and armpits were wiped with rose water. However, this didn't save medieval people from the stench or various diseases. Despite the absolute lack of sanitation and personal hygiene, the people of the Middle Ages were not indifferent to beauty. Therefore, in addition to aromatic substances, powder and oils, both men and women resorted to various tricks to preserve their beauty and youth. For example, ladies regularly washed their faces with urine. For most of us, this seems quite uncivilized. However, aristocratic women sincerely believed in the antiseptic and regenerating properties of urine. Of course, modern science knows that urine has no beneficial properties, and these women were torturing themselves in vain. Urine cannot bring back youth. In addition to urine, medieval people used various mixtures of ash, river water, and juices of poisonous plants for their beauty routines. Modern toothbrushes with soft bristles and special toothpaste are commonplace for most people in the 21st century. However, it was not always like that. In the Middle Ages, when hygiene was not a priority for most people, taking care of teeth was quite challenging. The toothbrush was replaced by a wooden stick with a sharpened end or a piece of cloth with crushed limestone inside, which had to be chewed in the mouth. These methods were not particularly effective, so few paid attention to them. The tradition of regular teeth cleaning in Europe was established quite late, but even then it was considered improper for a long time. The lack of hygiene led to serious oral health problems, with caries being particularly common. Needless to say, unpleasant breath was a common issue. However, it was even worse when the teeth of medieval ladies and gentlemen rotted and they bought healthy teeth from the poor to restore their smiles. Only in the 17th century did the first book about the necessity of oral care emerge, in which caries was described as toothworms. However, this did not lead to the widespread adoption of oral hygiene. Mass production of toothbrushes began only in the late 18th century, when a toothbrush with nylon bristles was invented. Since then, methods of oral care have been constantly improving, and oral health has become increasingly important for people worldwide. In the Middle Ages, maternal and infant mortality during childbirth was very high. Medicine was not yet so advanced, and in most cases when there was any pathology during pregnancy that could affect the course of childbirth, all the medical assistance given to the expectant mother consisted of reading healing prayers or using protective spells. However, as you can guess, neither of these methods was particularly effective. To ease the pains of childbirth, medieval women were given a drink made of oil and vinegar, and compresses made from eagle's dung were used. Such manipulations helped little, but they continued to resort to them for several centuries since there was no other alternative. Modern women have access to various hygiene products during menstruation, but it was not always like that. In the Middle Ages, women had to be inventive. In medieval Europe, women used special cloth pads attached to the waistband of their skirts to contain menstrual flow. However, these pads had to be washed and changed up to 10 times a day. Another common option popular in medieval England and France was a special type of bog moss called Sphagnum cymbifolium. The plant had excellent absorbing properties. The situation began to change only in the early 20th century, when nurses started using absorbent surgical towels as hygiene products. This discovery was the first step in the development of modern hygiene products, such as tampons and sanitary pads. Such an attitude towards hygiene led to the rise of diseases. However, the doctors of the Middle Ages, of course, were specialists in their field and knew how to treat ailments. The most common methods of treatment were leeches, bloodletting, and cauterization. Leeches were used to treat cancer and colds, abdominal colic, and headaches. While leech doctors thrived, their patients died from blood infections, even when they initially sought help for minor complaints like headaches or muscle fatigue. Open wounds were often treated with a red-hot poker, as it was believed to be an effective way to fight infection. Sometimes the poker helped, but not always, and sometimes, after such interventions, amputation of the limb was necessary. In general, just a few hundred years ago, the world was much darker, scarier, and more ignorant than it is today. It's hard to imagine that the quality of life for our not-so-distant ancestors was so drastically different from what we have today. Well, for today's comfort, we can only thank modern technology and progressive medical research. That's all from us. Wishing everyone a good mood, and see you next time.